Welcome to Vitals Podcast, delivered by Georgia Life Sciences in partnership with Cloudcast Media. I'm Maria Thacker, and we're really excited about today's episode with one of Georgia's own companies. Today, we're talking to Dr. Samir Patel, President and CEO of Moonlight Therapeutics. Thank you for joining us today, Samir. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Maria. I'm glad to be here.
So you're an engineer turned entrepreneur. You helped co-found Clearside Biomedical, which is a GRA, they still help support Clearside get off the ground.
Right.
And it's invented a can you say the word for me?
Suprachoroidal
drug delivery platform that's led to the company's first FDA-approved therapy, and now leads Moonlight's Microneedle stamp approach to make a food allergy care more convenient for families. Mm-hmm. So you earned your PhD at Georgia Tech here and chose to stay here, outstanding, and you got your dual Bachelor's of Science in at UC Berkeley. So are you originally from California?
Yeah, I grew up in California. I was born in India, but I moved when I was 6. So I did all of my education in California before I came to Georgia Tech. Yeah.
And you did some earlier work at J&J or a affiliate?
So I didn't know I wanted to get into the life sciences. I thought being in Silicon Valley, hey, I'm going to go in the tech world.
Tech world, yeah.
So my original degree was computer science, and then I quickly realized I have no knack for that. I do not want to spend time programming. And so I did a co-op at a J&J company just to try something new. And I was like, I could do this. And that's how I pivoted.
Yeah, the company was Alza? Is that
Alza
right?
Corp. Yeah, they worked in drug delivery, which is essentially what I do now. So.
That's so interesting. So clearly you've learned you love Georgia. You're going to stay here. So let's talk about Moonlight. Yeah. What problems did you set out to solve with Moonlight Therapeutics?
Well, we're in Atlanta, so a lot of people here have allergies, and I quickly learned that after moving here.
Yeah, I assume the pollen got you, is that right?
Yes. Yeah. It took some time to adjust, but I started meeting a lot of people with allergies, and while I was at Clearside, and I started hearing about how people were getting treatments for allergies, and it involved shots, multiple visits to the allergy clinics, and so it seemed like a really crude approach, but I was pretty focused on Clearside at the time, so when I decided to leave Clearside, I started, getting bored, thinking about what else I could do. And I remember this allergy thing that had been bugging me. Yeah. And so I started looking into allergies, and in particular, realized that food allergies are even more notorious. And I have a higher unmet need than
it's very scary
allergies.
For parents, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I had no personal experience, but once I started looking into this, I started contacting some people that I knew were doing research. A fellow Georgia Tech grad of mine was a professor at Texas Tech. And so we started talking, and he had done some research in food allergies with a drug delivery technology. And so that's how I got into the food allergy space and realized this was such a huge need with a problem that essentially was a drug delivery problem. And so that's what my expertise was, through graduate school and so forth. So we said, why don't we start a company together? And that's how Moonlight.
And when did the company officially form?
It officially formed on paper in 2017. Okay. Yeah, kind of in stealth mode. We were still figuring things out, getting the IP. We sort of officially started in 2019.
Okay. Yeah. Wow, that's exciting. Yeah. So tell us a bit more about the technology. How does the microneedle stamp change the life for patients versus what we have out there in the market right now?
So amazingly enough, the first therapy for food allergies actually occurred just within the last 5 years. So there's over 30 million people with food allergies in the US alone, yet there were no treatments available. Yeah. And so when we started, there was no treatment. There were a few things in the pipeline. And the current approved therapy is essentially eating peanuts.
Yes.
And so
I think my friend that has a child with a lot of food allergies, they gave him at the hospital ready with an EpiPen Reese's Pieces. Yes. And this kept giving them to him like every 10 minutes or something.
So that first therapy was essentially to formalize what people had been doing in sort of their allergy clinics or at home. And so they create a pharmaceutical grade of that approach. But it's very crude from an engineering perspective and from a therapy perspective, as I saw it, because it creates a lot of side effects. It's a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, it's scary too in some cases.
And it is scary. There's a lot of incidents of side effects. And so I took a look at this from my engineering perspective and said, hey, there's a better way to deliver the medication. The medication isn't the issue. The approach isn't the issue in terms of the mechanism and the biology. It's more about how the drug is delivered. So we said, let's design a more effective way to do that. And so we essentially use microneedles, these very tiny needles, to deliver the allergen through the skin and target the immune cells in the skin. So rather than it going through your GI tract, it goes through those immune cells. And by doing that, we think we can avoid all of the side effect issues and then focus really on really tiny doses to engage the immune cells. So the idea is make it more convenient for the patient, because patients don't like to eat the thing they're allergic to. So if you can give it through the skin, they can do it within a few minutes and be done on a regular basis.
Does it stay on? Or
it doesn't stay on. It's only a few minutes. It delivers the allergen immediately, and then you remove it. And that way you can go about the rest of your day. And if you don't have the systemic side effects that are associated with eating the allergen, like having an anaphylactic reaction, GI issues like vomiting, diarrhea, pain, abdominal pain, then patients, which are mostly kids, are more likely to adhere to the therapy and continue on.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So from inventing this suprachoroidal delivery at Clearside to Moonlight, what's the biggest product design lesson you carry forward?
So as an engineer, and I've worked with a lot of engineers because we make a drug device combination product. So I think the biggest lesson I learned through this is keep it simple. There's a lot of ways to over-engineer things, and especially when you're developing a new technology, you think, hey, I want to make it very unique and specific. I want to protect it by developing these patents around it. And the more sort of gizmos or widgets I can incorporate, the better, right? But from a therapy and drug development perspective, that just adds to your complications. And so
because you want the user experience to be as easy as possible.
Exactly. And you also have to explain this to the regulators, you know, that, hey, this thing does what it does. For every little thing you add, you have to then provide sufficient evidence that this can be done on a consistent basis. And so simpler is better. The initial things that you should try to do is to prove the therapy works, because that is your goal, is to make the therapy work, not the device work. The device can do something really fancy, but if it doesn't treat the patient, that's not your goal, and you've sort of essentially failed. And so focus on the therapy, the patient, then design the system to do that. And then later on, you can figure out these other additional things that might be nice to have, but not critical.
So I don't want to gloss over this, because not everyone in our audience understands the industry in depth. You said you're a combination product. So can you kind of explain that a bit more for people?
So the typical thought is when you go to the FDA for a product that you need to get approved, you're either a device or a drug. And most products usually fall in those two lines, and there's clear pathway to do that. But a lot of products, like say a transdermal patch, like say a Nicoderm patch or something like that you wear, is a drug. There's a drug inside of it, but there's also a device that delivers this. And so to the FDA, this is a combination product. So not only do you have to meet the regulatory requirements of a drug, you have to still meet the regulatory requirements for a device. And that can get really challenging. And as a result,
you did not pick the path of least resistance with this one.
That's correct, yes. And for investors, that's also a tricky situation, because a lot of them think of investing in a drug or a device, and sometimes these two things mean double the risk.
Okay. Did it diversify your investor pool by chance? Not
What's
really.
that?
Did it diversify your investor pool by chance?
No, it actually
narrows
it, because there's only a few group of people that will be willing to take that risk. Because investors are essentially taking a risk, and they're doing the risk analysis, and now you've added a second risk, you know, either a drug or a device that they're typically not used to investing in.
Wow. So tell me, you've been through the regulatory process a couple of times, particularly with Clearside, and you're going through this with Moonlight, of course. Is there some lesson you learned from Clearside or even your time at J&J that you would apply, you're applying to Moonlight, a lesson learned?
On the regulatory side?
Yes, on the regulatory side.
Yes. So on the regulatory side, I think it's often, as scientists and engineers, you think you know what you need to do to prove your thing works. And you think your goal is, prove this works. If I prove it works, then that's all that matters. But from the regulatory perspective, they're looking at something entirely different. They're doing a risk to benefit analysis, the safety versus the benefit of doing this treatment. And so you have to design your product, whether it's a drug or device or a combination product, so that you can prove to the FDA, not only can you do this once, say in one experiment, but that you can routinely do this to treat hundreds, thousands, millions, whatever the patient population is. And in order to do that, you have to have processes and tests and experiments to prove that. So as a result, I think the lesson that I learned is, hey, do the things that are required, understand the requirements first, and then design your experiments and build out. Don't willy-nilly do experiments because you think they are the best experiments to do, because maybe as a scientist, that's what you would do. But understand the regulations first and work backwards to do those. Sometimes you will do things that will just cause them to ask you more questions, and then you decided I wasn't going to do that anyways, and now you've opened up a can of worms.
And you probably use some of your capital to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So be efficient, understand the regulations, then work backwards.
That's great. And my guess is through experience and also having good mentors and advisors around you, you've learned a lot of this.
Yes.
Yeah. So what are the early signals over the next year that will tell you you're right on track? Obviously, no dates or confidential details, but you're at a phase. Tell us about the phase you're at, and like what, as you look forward, what are some signals that things are moving in the right direction?
Yeah, so at Moonlight Therapeutics, we're fortunate we're about to start a clinical trial. So our first trial, usually these trials are designed to evaluate safety. But fortunately, we're going to be working with peanut allergic patients. So the FDA has green-lighted us to begin directly working with peanut allergic patients. So we're going to evaluate the safety.
Yes,
Thank you. We're going to evaluate the safety of the doses that we want to apply to these patients. These will be adults and kids, and that'll be the first step. But we plan to do an extension trial with these patients to also look at long-term safety as whether their immune system is actually responding to the treatment.
Okay.
And so we're looking for clinical effect. And so the early signs that we see that this is working is that, one, we find a safe dose to administer. We want to introduce the allergen in this case, but we don't want to have the side effects that I mentioned earlier. So if we can find the safe doses to give and then give them on a repeated basis, then we can look for those efficacy signals. Those being immune markers in the body, in their blood, to show that the immune system is seeing the allergen and responding in the correct direction.
Yes, and this is being made possible by the award we just gave you, right? The deal of the year you just got.
Right.
So tell us about the deal a bit.
Yeah, so we closed a first round of equity financing, a Series A, to fund this clinical trial. And thank you for the recognition for that round. And that is to fund this trial, along with funds that we've now gotten from the NIH to support the trial. And so our goal is essentially use those funds to finish out this trial to generate the first sort of clinical data to show that this approach makes sense.
So you've decided to do your clinical trial here in Georgia?
That's right. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say that one of our first sites that we engaged with was here at CHOA, CHOA in South Carolina. We've got a couple of other sites here in the Southeast, and so we're really excited. Hopefully, we'll be announcing a patient being dosed at CHOA in the next few months.
Amazing. That's great. Please let us know so we can tell the community. So congratulations on all the success and Moonlight moving, especially in the last few years, pretty quickly. Let's talk about Georgia and the roots you've built here. How have Georgia Tech, local talent, or partners really helped shape Moonlight's path?
Well, Moonlight is a pretty unique situation in the sense the therapy and the patient population we're working with fits really well. So the technology comes out of Georgia Tech originally, and I went to Georgia Tech. So I have a lot of personal affiliation with that, and I'm really happy that we're using Georgia Tech technology to build this company and this treatment. Georgia is also peanut capital of the world. So our drug essentially comes from peanuts. So it is almost literally homegrown. So the proteins that we put onto our device, this microneedle stamp, come from farms here in the Southeast. So we extract these proteins. So in a sense, we have a homegrown therapy. The drug comes from there. The device comes from the university academic research. We put these two pieces together and formed a company here in Georgia. And we're hoping to, as we mentioned earlier, to do the first trial here with a site here at
amazing. Got to get that Georgia grown stamp on it. I know you see it around places, but that's amazing. It's a good story, especially coming out of here in the peaches and peanut state, whatever.
Right,
So if this works at scale, if we're looking 5 years from now, what changes for families and those patients are we looking at in this food allergy space? Yeah,
and I think this is what really drives us at Moonlight, is essentially understanding what patients and families really go through, because this is a family condition. You know, everybody in the family usually has to adjust to someone having a food allergy. And so what we hear from patients and families is that their lifestyle is dramatically affected. So we want to make something that's convenient, easy for them to do at home, and gets to a therapeutic response, something meaningful for them as quickly as possible, you know, so that they're not doing this for years to get to a point where they can feel comfortable. And so our goal here is in 5-6 years is to show that this therapy can do that and be able to be on a really fast track to get this approved by the FDA so that they can use this as one of the tools to help them manage their conditions. Because, you know, not one therapy is not going to solve this food allergy epidemic. And so we're hoping that this is one of the tools that they can use to get on their way to feeling safe around foods and help families get more comfortable with kids, as well as now adults that are now having issues with food allergies.
So when you're saying with foods, and that's usually because a lot of other foods are made around peanuts,
right.
And your focus is in peanuts. And we didn't talk about this, but is there any plans beyond into other allergy spaces? Or I mean, obviously you got to focus on what you need to focus on now, but what are even beyond that if this device in particular potentially?
Yeah, so the stamp is essentially a platform to deliver any allergen. And so the goal for the company will be to develop additional products. Our goal is not necessarily to develop peanut and then say any other nuts like walnuts, sesame, pistachio, milk and egg are big.
Yeah, milk and egg are big.
But I think the eventual goal will be to develop a combination therapy. So the stamp contains multiple allergens that can be used to treat multiple allergies, because it's not uncommon for someone to have a peanut allergy and another allergy.
Yeah, my friend I mentioned, their child also has an egg allergy with the peanut allergy. It's
perfect example, yeah. So the idea would be to figure out what combinations make the most sense, figure out a regulatory pathway with the FDA so that you can do that, rather than having to go through the same process for every single allergen, which would be, from a capital perspective and a time perspective, really burdensome, as well as it wouldn't be efficient to get therapies to patients that way.
No, definitely. So, I mean, you're thinking about the end user, the patients, obviously the process for the company, and thereby the investors. So if we pivot a bit into first-time founders who might be listening, what's the two-step playbook for going from lab insight to a real company? So bench to the company, I would say. Not necessarily bedside just yet, but if you were to do 2 steps.
So I would say, if we were to whittle this down into 2 things, one thing, if you're in academics or starting out in this approach, is that IP is really critical in this. Your intellectual property, that may not necessarily be patents, it may be know-how, but getting a handle on that first before you go out and talk too openly about the actual technology or discovery that you've had. So find resources that help you understand that and lock that down and know it well enough so that you know the best action to take. There are certain timelines and rules around that are non-negotiable, and so you want to make sure you're aware of that. The second thing I would say is, for a lot of folks who are academicians or in research, is to know your market and the regulatory pathway sufficiently well that you can speak to it. A lot of times you talk about a market as simply as the number of patients and things like that. But for investors and for people to put money into something, you really need to understand the need for that market and how to codify it in a way that's translatable to a business and the regulatory path to get there. Because if the regulatory path doesn't match the pathway and the capital that you need to get there, any investor will be able to see that disconnect and say, you haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. Well, thanks for picking 2. I know there's probably a lot more, but so let's move a bit more into investing now. What's your view of how VC investing is changing, and how does it impact the commercialization of new therapies?
Yeah. So this is my perspective of things that I've been seeing over the last decade and so forth. Is I think that the thought that I had when I got into this and what a lot of people were doing was, okay, you discover something, you're working in some kind of a lab or some environment, and you've got some IP or patents that you've filed, and you want to start a company. So you go out and you pitch to investors, you put a team together, you have a plan together, and investors think about your approach and decide whether to invest in you and your technology. That model, I think, is significantly changing for a number of reasons. I think the funds, the venture investors are essentially managing larger and larger pots of money, and they're looking at what it takes to realize an exit, which is essentially for them the way they monetize their investment, and that's their primary function. They want to help patients and they want to invest in these things, but they also need to return money back to their
it's a business. Yes.
Limited partners, and so they're changing the model because they realize they need to get in earlier and earlier into the game in order to hold more control of the company. Because let's face it, this is not a tech company. We're not going to get to a sales and revenue anytime soon. A lot of times these companies spend 10 years, 12 years, 15 years before they're able to get FDA approval and have a product to sell something. And so the amount of capital that goes into this, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, before that product gets there, they need to get in and get out as quickly as possible. So if they get in earlier, they have more control, they can do these kinds of things. So funds are now getting into the almost $1 billion category. And in order for them to make returns of that caliber, they need to get in earlier in the game. So this venture creation model, and there's different terms for this, I think has evolved, where now venture investors are now becoming operators. They're coming in, building the companies themselves. They're looking for technology, and putting different pieces of technologies together to say, hey, we can build a company that treats cancer if we take these 3 elements together, and we'll have a better chance of that. And we're going to bring in the expertise ourselves and build that company out. And we're going to pour a lot of money in up front because we're going to own most of the company. So for people like who are thinking of the traditional model, entrepreneur comes in, they run the company, they have some control over it. That model, I think, is getting smaller and smaller. And so we have to think more savvily, in a more savvy way, about how to go about developing therapies if that's the direction we're headed. It sounds like a great approach, but it sort of limits the number of people that can get into the game in that sense. Yeah.
No, sure. And I appreciate your being nimble and adapting to it. I don't think every entrepreneur has that skill set. So, so how can early stage biotech companies, med tech, whatever, leverage non-dilutive, let me restate that. How can early stage life science companies leverage non-dilutive government funding to advance their therapy through research and development?
Yeah. So I think if you look at some of the challenges that I just spoke about, it essentially means that, the venture investors are looking for either much more advanced companies or they're looking to get in earlier in the game. So the people in between that are actually trying to do this have to find capital somewhere else. So the smaller investors are becoming few and far between. And so we've had to go through sources like angel investors and things like that. But there's a source, which is non-dilutive funding through federal government grants or nonprofit grants, that I think can fill the gap. And that's what we've done at Moonlight, which is essentially look for these sources of funding and figure out a way to use that to get to a place where that's meaningful. And, a lot of times, these sources like the Small Business Innovation and Research Grants are essentially the essential model that's been created to help fund those kinds of companies, but they're not really well tapped into. And so a lot of times companies find that avenue to get funds, but they focus on doing work at the very early stages, which is research, and not moving a product or a technology through the development process, which is essentially what investors are looking for, that you're moving along the regulatory path to prove that this can become a product. And so I think the key is to develop a plan around how you can get the money to get that point, the technology or the product to that point, and where you can get those funds, so that these investors can now think of you as a real company with a real potential of a product, rather than just doing academic research at a company.
Yeah. And I think you got to look at other government sources too, like DOD, even CDC sometimes has some grants as well. So I think, thinking beyond NIH is also important. And the DOD ones tend to be more geared towards product development. But in the end, that early stage non-dilutive funding, particularly from government, where we don't see VCs and other funds really invest in that very early stage research because it's still too risky. So I think it's important that other founders also know, of course, there's NIH money, but there's also grants and dollars at DOD, CDC, and other government agencies as well that help with that early stage of moving towards product development. The DOD funds tend to be more product development focused, not just an early stage research. So non-dilutive funding is critical. And we do live in an unusual time at the moment. So I think really working to empower our small company executives to learn more about other ways to find those dollars is critical, as well as telling their stories. So those people that help make decisions about funding these agencies understand that it's a critical piece of our resiliency as a country to develop these projects and to remain innovative as a country. So it also helps our investors that are further along understand how it reduce the risk for them. The government has invested, reduce the risk for them to next come in and fund the next phase of it. So it gives a little bit of a stamp of approval to move that innovation forward to the next phase. So you've really navigated this really well. You've had a really successful, particularly over the last 2 years, a lot of momentum with the company. are you finding traditional investors are viewing the non-dilutive funding when performing diligence on a company, though?
Yeah. Your comment on the DoD and other sources is really good because, so as an example, we're doing food allergies and peanut in particular. I never thought the DoD would be interested in this, but someone told me that this is on the list of their priorities, and so we actually did get a DoD grant this year.
Oh, congrats!
And so this was not something I actively looked for, but someone told me about this, and we looked at it and they said, yeah, food allergies are a priority for them. And so I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, but that's another example of how you need to be more creative around how you look for sources of funding. But to your question, I thought, and I think a lot of people think, let's say, so we've had now over $9 million in SBIR funds just from the NIH. And these are funds not to do animal work, to get to the clinic. Some of these funds are to actually run a clinical trial, to do clinical manufacturing. And so that goes back to the clinical development and development process I spoke. Try to get these funds to move the product up rather than just around the same research. But I thought, okay, so I've raised $3, $6, whatever million to this point. They should value this company, at least that much, if not more. That's not how they see it. The dollars are not the critical part of this. The value is in what you do with that money. Okay, so don't think when you're going to be talking to some VCs, you say, I've raised $9-10 million, and they're interested in your technology and your product. That hey, they're going to come in and want to think, we'll add another 10 million to that, and they'll think your company is worth at least $10 million, if not more, because obviously you raised that much money. That's not how they view it. They view that as, that's great that you've raised some money, that's good for you, but where's the product? How far have you gone? And they're doing their math on where the eventual exit is and how much money is needed to continue this work and finish it out. So don't get hung up on the dollar amounts and negotiating on that. Think of it more as, what are you actually able to do with that money? So try to make the most of the funds that you have to progress the product. That will create more value than you touting how much money you've raised.
Yeah, though it makes for good headlines.
Yes.
So stepping back, looking at our Georgia ecosystem, which you have invested your time growing the company, been educated here to advance more innovations in our ecosystem to the clinic. What can we do as an ecosystem? Or, ask of our Georgia leaders even, like, what do you see as missing in our ecosystem at this point in time?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of great research going on at all the great institutions that we have here. I've been fortunate to be a part of a lot of them. I think what we miss a lot is, there needs to be an ecosystem. I think we all agree with that, and there are various elements of the ecosystem that exist but are not necessarily, optimized for, the value that we think we have that we could provide towards generating companies as well as products. And so I think there's a value in people to go out and find people that are in some of these larger ecosystems, like in the Northeast and on the West Coast, bring them here, showcase what we're doing, and have them engage on a regular basis. And it behooves people like me to go out and network and have those people come here. And the more that we can have them come here and be involved, the more likely we're going to get noticed for what we're doing. And if we can find a better way to market our successes, and I think Georgia Life Sciences does a great job of trying to do that for the Georgia community. But I think we as the people in the community need to actively do that on our own basis, on our own time, and then talk about things that we're trying to do here and bring notice to that. And I think if we do that more as individuals, I think that will play a lot better than having just relying on people like Maria and the organizations to do that themselves, because we are the best advocates. I have to go for my company, and I imagine lots of people do that. Even if you don't have a company, you're in research, you go to conferences, meet the people that are not just the scientific, technical folks, meet the business folks. They're at these conferences. There are lots of analysts there doing research and evaluation on potential companies or products. Find those people, tell them about what you're doing, convince them to come out here, and I think that'll help the community a lot.
No, I think that's great. I appreciate the plug and the support for what we do. And we like that as well. We want you to engage with the organization, but also for us to advance our mission to build the business of life sciences here in Georgia. Excuse me. We need to know what's happening in Georgia. So if we are advocating for something on the Hill right now, it's SBIR reauthorization. It's really important to know what companies have SBIR grants so we can bring you into the rooms with our policymakers and have you tell those stories in an effective way. We don't want to be necessarily the communicator. We'd rather have you in the room, introduce you, and let you take it away, you know?
Yeah.
So having you all plug into the organization for that reason alone, I think is really critical. And then in general, I think from a business standpoint, the companies, you know, lifting their heads out of the lab and, you know, those funding cycles that we're all running, everyone's running around and doing around the country, taking a minute and seeing what's in your own backyard, whether to build your mentor network, to build your workforce base here in the state, whatever it might be, is important. And it can be through our events. It could be through convenings down at Science Square. Y'all are in Portal, right? Yeah, at Portal Innovations, or even events in other areas of the state, up in Athens and Augusta. It's really critical to remember to plug into your local community, so then you can be a better spokesperson and advocate for the industry here in Georgia.
Agreed.
So I really appreciate your time today. I do always like to end the podcast with a fun fact about you that people may not know. Heard everything from volunteering to sporting acumen. Is there any fun fact you'd be willing to share with us today?
Well, I come from a line of farmers, so but apparently I like gardening. So my dad got me into that. So we used to grow a lot of vegetables, and so I'm trying to get my son, who's now 7, into that as well. I think gardening and growing things is much like starting companies. You put something in the ground, you do the things that you think you need to do to grow that. And sometimes the elements are there, it works, sometimes it doesn't. Not all the seeds grow, but you have to plant enough seeds and you have to put the effort behind it to see it. And it's something miraculous to see something go from a seed all the way to something that's growing that you can eat, you know? And so I think I like that aspect, and that's something I enjoy doing.
Well, I love the very real analogy. That was really helpful to hear. Thank you again for your time today and telling us a bit about Moonlight, and I look forward to seeing how it continues to progress, especially how your clinical trial moves forward. And thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you to Cloudcast Media for supporting and putting on today's production, and to our partners at the Rice Innovation Center as well. Georgia Life Sciences is proud to put on the Vitals podcast, and we look forward to welcoming you to our next podcast.